I'm so sorry, sir. Please, it's a mistake.
What do you mean by mistake? This child just called me Papa.
No, that's impossible. There's been a terrible error.
Blood doesn't lie. But sometimes, it takes a child's innocent grip to reveal the truth buried beneath a lifetime of violence. To understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to the moment it all started. The gunshot echoed through the underground casino like a death knell. Kong Min-jae didn't flinch. He never did. The man crumpled at his feet had made the fatal mistake of skimming money from the sole operation. Min-jae's operation. The empire he'd built from blood and broken bones didn't tolerate thieves, didn't forgive weakness, and certainly didn't show mercy. "Clean this up," Min-jae said, his voice colder than the winter wind that howled outside the luxury establishment. He straightened his Armani suit, wiped an invisible speck of dust from his cuff, and walked past his trembling guards as if he'd just concluded a business meeting rather than executed a man. This was the life Kong Min-jae had chosen at 17 when he'd clawed his way out of the slums of Busan. Now, at 32, he ruled Seoul's underworld with an iron fist wrapped in expensive Italian leather. Politicians whispered his name in fear. Rival gangs avoided his territory. Even the police knew better than to dig too deeply into his affairs. But power, Min-jae had learned, was a lonely throne. The casino floor gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a facade of legitimacy masking the empire's rotten core. High-stakes gamblers threw away fortunes, while Min-jae's network laundered money through every spin of the roulette wheel, every shuffle of cards. It was a well-oiled machine, and Min-jae was its ruthless architect. It was 3 a.m. when Min-jae made his rounds, a habit he'd never broken. Trust was a commodity he couldn't afford, so he inspected everything himself. The security room, the counting house, the storage areas where more than just liquor was kept. That's when he heard it. A baby's cry. Min-jae stopped mid-step, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his waist. His head of security, Junho, immediately tensed beside him. "Boss?" Junho asked, his hand already on his weapon. "Do you hear that?" Min-jae's dark eyes scanned the corridor, his jaw tight. The crying came, again, soft, muffled, coming from the direction of the service hallways where only staff were permitted. "Impossible," Junho muttered. "No children are allowed in the building. Ever." "Then explain that sound," Min-jae said, his voice dangerously quiet. They moved swiftly through the corridor, Min-jae's expensive shoes making no sound on the polished floor. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It pulled at something in Min-jae's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he immediately tried to suppress. They rounded a corner, and that's when Min-jae saw her. A woman in a cleaner's uniform, her back to them, frantically trying to soothe a small child who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. The baby's cries filled the narrow hallway, and the woman was whispering urgently in English mixed with broken Korean. "Please, baby, please be quiet. Mama's here. Everything's okay." But the child wouldn't calm down. Junho raised his hand, signaling the guards to approach, but Min-jae held up, a fist. Wait. There was something about the woman's voice, something desperate and terrified that made Min-jae pause. She wasn't a threat, she was scared. "Turn around," Min-jae commanded, his voice cutting through the child's wails. The woman froze. Slowly, she turned, clutching the baby against her chest. Her dark skin seemed to pale in the harsh fluorescent light, and her eyes, deep brown and wide with fear, met Min-jae's gaze for just a moment before dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I had no choice. The babysitter canceled and I couldn't miss work and I—" "Who are you?" Min-jae interrupted. "Aisha. I clean the 3rd floor. I've worked here for 6 months. Please, sir. I need this job. I'll never bring her again, I promise. Please don't." The baby suddenly stopped crying and turned to look at Min-jae. The child's face was tear-streaked, with light brown skin, soft curls, and the most striking gray eyes Min Jae had ever seen. Eyes that seemed to look right through him. Then something impossible happened. The baby reached toward Min Jae with both tiny arms, making urgent grabbing motions and whimpering. Before anyone could react, the child squirmed out of Aisha's grip and ran. Toddled, really, straight to Min Jae, wrapping small arms around his leg and clinging with surprising strength. "No!" Aisha gasped, lunging forward. Junho's gun was out in an instant, along with 3 other guards who had appeared from nowhere, all weapons trained on the child and the woman. "Don't shoot!" Min Jae barked, his voice like thunder. Everyone froze. Min Jae looked down at the baby clinging to his leg. The child had stopped crying completely and was now looking up at him with those impossibly gray eyes, a small smile breaking through the tears. Tiny fingers gripped his expensive trousers, wrinkling the fabric. For the first time in 15 years, Kang Min Jae didn't know what to do. He'd killed men without hesitation. He'd negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with Yakuza bosses. He'd survived 3 assassination attempts and come out stronger each time. But this tiny human clinging to him like he was a lifeline, this unmade him. Slowly, against every instinct that told him to remain untouchable, Min Jae knelt down. The baby immediately released his leg and climbed into his arms, settling against his chest as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The crying stopped completely. The child's breathing evened out. A small hand rested over Min Jae's heart. And for the first time since he was a child himself, Min Jae felt something like peace. "Boss?" Junho's voice was uncertain. Min Jae stood, the baby still nestled in his arms. Aisha was watching with an expression of pure terror, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone out," Min Jae said quietly. "But boss, now." The guards hesitated for only a second before retreating. Junho gave Aisha one last warning look before disappearing around the corner. The hallway fell silent except for the baby's soft breathing. Min Jae looked at the woman. Aisha really looked at her. She was perhaps mid-20s, with hair pulled back in a tight bun, no makeup, wearing a uniform 2 sizes too large. Her hands were shaking. "How old?" Min Jae asked. "What?" "The child." "How old?" 18 months, Aisha whispered. Min Jae's mind was calculating. 18 months. A year and a half. He studied the baby's face, the gray eyes, the shape of the nose, the way the child had run to him without fear. "What's the child's name?" Aisha hesitated. Ji-yoon. Korean. She'd given the baby a Korean name. "Come with me," Min Jae said, adjusting his hold on the child who seemed content to stay in his arms. "Please, I'll leave right now. You'll never see us again. I said come with me. Unless you'd prefer, I have my guards escort you." Aisha's shoulders slumped in defeat. She followed Min Jae through the casino's private corridors, past his security team, who stared in undisguised shock at their boss carrying a baby. They reached his private office, a room few people ever entered, and fewer left alive if they displeased him. Min Jae sat down behind his desk, the baby still in his arms. Ji-yoon had fallen asleep, tiny fingers still clutching his shirt. He gestured for Aisha to sit in the chair across from him. "Talk," he said simply. Aisha's hands twisted in her lap. "I came to Korea 3 years ago. I was studying abroad and I fell in love with someone. Someone I shouldn't have. He was powerful, dangerous. When I got pregnant, his family tried to force me to get rid of the baby. They said a foreigner's child would ruin everything. So I ran." "You ran where?" "I went back to the States, had the baby there. But they found me. They said if I ever came back to Korea, if I ever tried to contact him, they'd take Ji-yoon from me. So I changed my name, got fake papers, and came back anyway, because I had nothing left in America. No family, no money. At least here I could work." Min Jae's jaw tightened. Who was the father? Aisha's eyes filled with fresh tears. It doesn't matter. He thinks we're dead. His family made sure of that. Show me the baby's back, Min-jae said suddenly. What? The baby's back. Show me. Now. With trembling hands, Aisha carefully lifted Ji-yoon's shirt. There, on the child's left shoulder blade, was a birthmark. 3 small dots arranged in a triangle, like a constellation. Min-jae's world tilted. He had the same birthmark in the exact same place. So had his father. And his grandfather. It ran in the Clung bloodline, passed down through generations. Get out, Min-jae said, his voice barely controlled. What? Get out of my office. Go back to work. Tell no one about this conversation. I'll send for you tomorrow. But go! Aisha practically ran from the room, but she stopped at the door. The baby, she said softly. Min-jae looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. Should hand Ji-yoon over immediately. Should send them both away and forget this ever happened. But his arms wouldn't move. I'll bring her to you, he said finally. In a moment. When Aisha was gone, Min-jae sat alone with the sleeping child. He gently turned Ji-yoon over, lifted the shirt again, and stared at the birthmark that matched his own. The gray eyes. The instant connection. The way the baby had run to him as if she'd known him her entire life. With shaking hands, Min-jae pulled out his phone and called his private doctor, a man who handled sensitive matters and knew the price of discretion. I need a DNA test, Min-jae said, immediately. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll cut out your tongue. He carefully took a sample from the baby's mouth, then his own. When the doctor arrived 20 minutes later, Min-jae handed over the samples with explicit instructions. 24 hours, he said. Not a second longer. That night, Min-jae couldn't sleep. He stood, in his penthouse apartment overlooking Seoul, drinking whiskey and trying to remember. 3 years ago. Who had he been seeing? He'd kept his relationships casual, never staying with anyone long enough to develop attachments. Attachments were weaknesses, and he couldn't afford weakness. But there had been someone. A visiting student from America. Dark skin, bright laugh, fearless smile. She'd stumbled into his life at a gallery opening, not knowing who he was, treating him like a normal man instead of a monster. They'd had 3 months together before she'd disappeared. He'd searched for her, but then his informants told him she'd died in a car accident in California. He'd believed them. Why wouldn't he? Now he knew the truth. They'd lied. His own organization had lied to him. Someone had wanted her gone, wanted the baby gone, and they'd manipulated him into thinking them dead. The rage that filled Min-jae was cold and calculated. Someone would pay for this. But first, he needed proof. The 24 hours felt like 24 years. Min-jae moved through his daily operations like a ghost, his mind elsewhere. He executed a smuggling deal worth millions without really paying attention. He met with police commissioners and politicians, his usual charm and menace feeling hollow. When the doctor finally called, Min-jae was in a meeting with his lieutenants. He stood up mid-sentence and walked out, ignoring their confused looks. Tell me, Min-jae said into the phone. The match is 99.9%. The child is yours, Mr. Clung. There's no doubt. Min-jae ended the call. He stood in the empty hallway, his hand gripping the phone so hard the screen cracked. He had a daughter. An 18-month-old daughter who'd been hidden from him, whose mother had been terrorized into silence, who'd lived in fear while he'd built his empire on blood. He'd failed to protect his own child. The thought made him want to burn down everything he'd built. Instead, he made a call. Bring Aisha to the penthouse, now, and make sure no one sees you. An hour later, Aisha stood in his living room, Ji-yoon on her hip, looking around at the luxury with wide eyes. Min-jae watched from across the room, his hands in his pockets, to keep from reaching for the child. Sit, he said. Aisha sat on the edge of the leather sofa, holding Ji-yoon close. The baby was awake now. Those gray eyes, his eyes, looking around curiously. Min-jae pulled out his phone and showed her the DNA results. Aisha's face crumpled. "Oh God," she whispered. "You're him. You're the one I—" She looked up at Min-jae, recognition dawning. "Your hair was different. You dressed differently then. I didn't realize. At the gallery, you said your name was Min. I never knew your full name. I never knew you were—" "A monster?" Min-jae finished coldly. "I was going to say, powerful." "Same thing." Ji-yoon squirmed in Aisha's arms, reaching again for Min-jae. This time, Aisha let her go. The baby toddled across the room and raised her arms. Min-jae picked her up, and Ji-yoon immediately settled against his chest, her small hand over his heart again. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Min-jae asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I tried," Aisha said, tears streaming down her face. "I went to your office building. Your security stopped me. When I said I needed to see you about something urgent, they took me to a back room. 3 men in suits told me you never wanted to see me again. They said if I was pregnant, I needed to take care of it. They offered me money. When I refused, they threatened me. They said they'd make sure I disappeared if I didn't leave Korea immediately. Did you get names?" "One of them. He said to call him Lee." Min-jae's blood turned to ice. Lee Sung-min, his former right-hand man, the man who'd supposedly retired 2 years ago to the countryside. "Keep talking," Min-jae said quietly, but there was murder in his eyes. "They followed me to the airport. I went to the States, had Ji-yoon there. I thought you knew. I thought you'd sent them. But then I started wondering. You'd been so different with me. Gentle. Real. So I came back to Korea 6 months ago with fake papers. Took a job where I thought I'd never run into you. I just wanted to be somewhere that felt close to where Ji-yoon was conceived, even if we could never be together. The car accident in California, you faked it. No, that was real. My cousin died in that accident. They must have mistaken her for me. When I heard about it, I used it as cover. Let everyone think I was dead." Min-jae sat down, Ji-yoon still in his arms. The baby was playing with his tie now, completely content. He looked at this tiny person, his daughter, and felt something crack open in his chest. All the walls he'd built, all the coldness he'd cultivated. It meant nothing in the face of those gray eyes looking up at him with complete trust. "Papa," Ji-yoon said suddenly, patting his chest. Min-jae froze. Aisha gasped. "She's never said that before," Aisha whispered. "She doesn't talk much yet. Just mama and a few other words." "Papa," Ji-yoon said again, then smiled and buried her face in his neck. Min-jae's arms tightened around her. In that moment, he made a decision. He would burn down his entire empire if that's what it took to keep this child safe. "You and Ji-yoon are moving in here," Min-jae said. "Tonight." "What? No, we can't." "It's not a request. By now, people in my organization know I took interest in you. If Lee Sung-min is still alive and finds out, you're both targets. I'm not letting my daughter out of my sight." "You don't want us," Aisha said bitterly. "You want her. I'm just the inconvenience that comes with the package." Min-jae met her eyes. "You're the woman I loved 3 years ago. The woman I mourned. The woman who gave birth to my child alone because my own people betrayed me. You're not an inconvenience. You're under my protection. Now. Both of you." Before Aisha could respond, Min-jae's phone rang. Junho. "Boss, we have a problem. Someone leaked information about the baby. I don't know how, but Park's crew knows. They're moving on the casino. They want leverage." Park Tae-sung, Min-jae's oldest rival. The snake who'd been trying to take over Seoul's south side for 5 years. "Lock down the building," Min-jae ordered. "I'm bringing them somewhere safe." He ended the call and looked at Aisha. "We need to leave. Now." "What's happening?" "What always happens in my world. Violence." Min-jae moved quickly, calling his most trusted guards, men who'd been with him since the beginning. Within minutes, they were in an armored SUV, racing through Seoul's empty streets toward a safe house in the mountains. Ji-yoon had fallen asleep again in her car seat, oblivious to the danger. Behind them, the city burned. Park's crew had attacked the casino with military-grade weapons. Min-jae's people fought back. The violence he'd spent years cultivating had finally come home to roost, and his daughter was caught in the crossfire. The safe house was a fortress, disguised as a mountain cabin. Min-jae carried Ji-yoon inside while Aisha followed, her eyes wide with shock. "Is this your life?" she asked. "Guns and violence and running." "Yes," Min-jae said simply, "but it doesn't have to be hers. Or yours." He laid Ji-yoon in a bed in the master bedroom, tucking a blanket around her sleeping form. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. Nothing like the world she'd been born into. "I'm getting out," Min-jae said suddenly. Aisha turned to him in shock. "What?" "Out of the organization. Out of the life. I'll dismantle everything I've built if that's what it takes. You can't just leave. They'll kill you. They'll try." Min-jae's smile was cold. "But I've been preparing for this day. I have contingencies, insurance, evidence that could put half of Seoul's elite in prison. I was waiting for the right moment to use it. And this is that moment? A baby made you want to change?" Min-jae looked down at his sleeping daughter. "Yes." Over the next 3 days, Min-jae orchestrated his exit from the underworld with the same ruthless efficiency he'd used to build his empire. He released evidence to prosecutors. Corruption, murder, smuggling. But he was careful. He only targeted his enemies and those who'd betrayed him. Lee Sung-min was found dead in his countryside home, a single bullet between his eyes. The message was clear. No one touched Kang Min-jae's family and lived. Park Tae-sung's entire operation collapsed when Min-jae turned his own lieutenants against him. By the time the smoke cleared, Park was in police custody, and his territory was in chaos. But Min-jae paid a price, too. Half his assets were seized, his legitimate businesses were investigated. His name, which once commanded respect, now brought only legal scrutiny. He didn't care. He had what mattered. In the safe house, something unexpected happened. Min-jae learned to be a father. It started with simple things. Changing diapers, which he did with the same precision he'd used to plan operations. Warming bottles. Reading bedtime stories in Korean and broken English, while Ji-yoon giggled at his pronunciation. Aisha watched in amazement as the cold Mafia boss transformed. He was awkward at first, holding Ji-yoon like she might break, but the baby had no such reservations. She climbed all over him, pulled his hair, demanded to be picked up constantly. And Min-jae, the man who'd killed without hesitation, melted every time. "You're good at this," Aisha said one evening, watching Min-jae rock Ji-yoon to sleep after a nightmare. "I'm terrible at this," Min-jae corrected, "but I'm learning." "Why did you really do it? Destroy everything you built?" Min-jae looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. "Because when she ran to me in that hallway, when she held on to me like I was her whole world, I felt something I haven't felt since I was 10 years old. I felt loved, not feared, not respected. Loved. And I realized I'd been dead inside for 20 years. She brought me back to life." Tears filled Aisha's eyes. "I never stopped loving you, you know. Even when I thought you'd sent those men. Even when I hated you. I never stopped." Min-jae met her gaze across the room. "I never stopped either. I just didn't know you were alive to love." That night, after Ji-yoon was asleep in her crib, Min-jae and Aisha talked. Really talked. About the past. About the lies and the pain. About the future they might build together. "I don't expect forgiveness," Min-jae said. "I brought this danger to you. My world destroyed your peace. Our daughter needs both her parents," Aisha said softly. "And maybe I need you too." But peace was short-lived. On the 7th day, Junho arrived with devastating news. There was a traitor in Min-jae's inner circle. Someone had been feeding information to his enemies all along. Someone who knew about the safe house. "We need to move," Junho said. "Now." They had maybe an hour's head start. Min-jae acted fast. He sent Aisha and Ji-yoon with his most trusted guards to a boat waiting at the coast. He would follow after eliminating the threat. "I'm not leaving without you," Aisha protested. "You have to. For her." Min-jae kissed Ji-yoon's forehead, breathing in her baby scent. "Papa will come find you, I promise." As the SUV carrying his family disappeared down the mountain road, Min-jae turned to Junho. "Who's the traitor?" "Kwon. He's been with us for 8 years. Park promised him your territory." Min-jae's face showed no emotion. "Bring him to me." What happened in the next hour would be recounted in Seoul's underworld for years. Min-jae executed Kwon himself, but not before extracting every piece of information about who else had betrayed him. Then he did something unexpected. He called the police. "This is Kang Min-jae," he said when the detective answered. "I'm at these coordinates. I'm turning myself in. But first, I'm going to tell you where to find Park Tae-sung's real operation, the trafficking ring you've been trying to shut down for 3 years. I'm going to give you everything." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm done. I'm out. And I want to make sure my family is safe. You get Park's operation, and you let my family leave Korea. Deal?" There was a pause. "Deal." Min-jae smiled grimly. He'd spent 15 years building an empire of fear. It was fitting that he'd destroy it from the inside. But Park wasn't going down without a fight. They hit the safe house with everything they had. 20 armed men, explosives, no mercy. Min-jae and his remaining guards held them off in a firefight that lit up the mountain. The police were coming, but they wouldn't arrive in time. Min-jae fought like a man with nothing to lose and everything to protect. He'd sent his daughter to safety. Now he just had to survive long enough to see her again. The explosion, when it came, was massive. Park's men had rigged the entire lower floor with C4. Min-jae saw it coming seconds too late. He dove through a window as the building erupted in flames behind him. He landed hard, rolled, and came up running. Behind him, the safe house burned like a funeral pyre. Park's men were dead, his guards were dead, and as far as the world would know, Kang Min-jae was dead too. Good. He disappeared into the forest with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burner phone in his pocket. It took him 3 days to reach Seoul, moving only at night, stealing food, looking like a homeless man instead of Korea's most feared crime boss. By the time he arrived, the news was everywhere. Kang Min-jae, the devil of Seoul, dead in a mountain explosion. Police had raided Park's operations, arrested 24 people, shut down the trafficking ring. It was over. Min-jae used his last remaining contact to get a passport. A real one this time, not fake. A new identity, a new life. 6 months later, in a small coastal town in New Zealand, Aisha pushed a stroller along the beach. Ji-yoon was bigger now, walking more steadily, chattering in a mix of Korean and English. They'd started over. New names. New life. The money Min-jae had hidden in offshore accounts ensured they'd never want for anything. But Aisha still cried sometimes, thinking about the man who'd sacrificed everything for them, the man she'd loved, the man she'd lost. "Mama, man," Ji-yoon said, pointing toward the shore. Aisha looked up and froze. A man stood near the water, watching them. He was thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, a beard covering his face. But those eyes, those gray eyes she'd loved 3 years ago were unmistakable. Min-jae. Ji-yoon started running before Aisha could stop her. The toddler's arms were outstretched, her face lit with joy. "Papa! Papa!" Min-jae knelt in the sand as his daughter crashed into him, wrapping tiny arms around his neck. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking. Aisha ran to them, tears streaming down her face. "How?" she gasped. "They said you were dead." "I was," Minjae said, looking up at her with tears in his eyes. "But she brought me back to life. You both did." He stood, holding Ji-yoon in one arm and pulling Aisha close with the other. "I'm not that man anymore. I have no power, no empire, no money beyond what I saved for you. I'm just just a man who wants to be a father. A husband, if you'll have me." Aisha cupped his face in her hands. "We'll have you. We never stopped waiting for you." They stood there on the beach, a family forged from violence and fear, now transformed by love and redemption. Ji-yoon babbled happily, playing with her father's beard. Minjae laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so foreign to him that it startled them both. "What now?" Aisha asked. Minjae looked down at his daughter, then at the woman who'd given him everything worth having. "Now we live. Really live. No more running. No more fear. Just us." "Papa stay?" Ji-yoon asked, her gray eyes, so like his own, filled with hope. Minjae pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Yes, baby. Papa stays. Forever." And for the first time in his life, Kang Min-jae made a promise he knew he could keep. 3 years later, Min-jae stood in the kitchen of their small house, making breakfast, while Ji-yoon colored at the table, and her baby brother slept in a bassinet nearby. Aisha was at work. She'd become a teacher at the local school. Min-jae ran a small security consulting business, using his knowledge of criminal operations to help law enforcement, without ever revealing who he'd once been. It was a quiet life, a simple life, everything his old life hadn't been. "Papa, look," Ji-yoon said, holding up her drawing. It was 4 stick figures holding hands. "Family." Minjae took the drawing and pinned it to the refrigerator next to a dozen others. "It's perfect, baby. Are you happy, Papa?" Minjae looked around at his modest home, at his daughter's smiling face, at the photos on the walls showing birthday parties and beach days and ordinary moments that were anything but ordinary to him. "Yeah, baby," he said, picking her up and spinning her around until she giggled. "I'm happier than I ever knew I could be." Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. Sometimes it comes from a small hand clutching yours, from a child's unconditional love, from the chance to be better than you were. And sometimes, the most powerful man in the room is the one willing to give up all his power for the people he loves. Minjae had been the devil of soul. Now he was just Papa, and he'd never been more powerful. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you believe in second chances, please hit that subscribe button. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your life? And give this video a like to help others discover this story of redemption and love. Thank you for staying until the end. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to become who you were meant to be.